Mobutu's last love, Bobi Ladawa. They said he was a man made of iron, a leader who ruled a nation with fear and fire. But even iron melts when it meets warmth, and for Mobutu Sese Seko, that warmth was Bobi Ladawa. Her name whispered softly through the palace halls of Gabadalite. Bobi, the woman who tamed the storm inside the man who tamed a country. She did not shout, she did not command. She loved quietly, like the moonlight falling on a wounded lion. Bobi was born in 1945 in Doula, in the lush Equateur province of the Congo. She was a simple girl before the storms of power found her. Her early days were filled with prayer, school, and the laughter of her twin sister, Kosia. She trained to be a teacher, someone who shaped minds, not empires. Yet fate, with its mysterious handwriting, drew her path toward the most powerful man in Zaire. Mobutu met her in the 1970s, a time when he was already the leopard of Zaire, the man whose name echoed across Africa, from Kinshasa to Cairo. He ruled with charm and generosity and ruthlessness. Yet when he looked at Bobi, the world seemed to pause. He saw calm. He saw something no throne could offer: peace. Bobi was not like the others who sought his favor. She didn't flatter him. She didn't fear him. She looked into his eyes and saw Joseph, not the president, not the leopard, but the man who once was a soldier, a dreamer, a son. He began visiting her quietly. He would leave the grand halls, the flashing cameras, and find his way to her door. The first time he sat in her small home, the president of Zaire removed his cap, loosened his tie, and laughed like a boy. That night, he stayed longer than he intended. She listened as he spoke about his youth, his dreams, his loneliness. When he left, he kissed her forehead and said, "You make me forget who I am." Their bond deepened in shadows. She became his secret, his peace. He would write her notes on paper with the presidential seal, but the words were not commands. They were poems, tender and clumsy. "When I see your smile," he wrote once, "I remember that power is nothing without warmth. But power has its own jealous rhythm." Mobutu was married to Marie Antoinette Mobutu, his first wife, the mother of his children, and the first lady of Zaire. The palace was filled with protocol, politics, and distance. Marie Antoinette was elegant but cold, wounded by years of infidelity and state pressure. Bobi was warmth itself. She did not ask for titles. She only asked to be near him. In her, he found something that even a crown could not give: the feeling of being seen. Their love was not clean. It was messy, secret, filled with guilt and desire. He built her a house in Badalite, a hidden palace within a palace. He would escape there, away from the eyes of ministers and generals, and find her waiting, sometimes barefoot, sometimes reading a book, always smiling when she saw him. They laughed. They quarreled. They made up. She cooked for him herself, refusing the servants, saying, "A man eats with love only when his woman feeds him." He would watch her move around the kitchen and say, "You are the only thing I cannot control." In 1977, when Marie Antoinette died, Mobutu was a man crushed by loss. For all their distance, she had been his history, his companion in struggle. Bobi came to him not as a replacement, but as comfort. She stood by him silently, held his hands, and let him cry without shame. 3 years later, on May 1st, 1980, he made her his wife. The marriage was both public and private, announced to the world, blessed by the church, but shadowed by politics. The Pope refused to officiate, but Mobutu didn't care. He was marrying not for diplomacy, but for love. In front of cameras and generals, he took her hand and said, "Bobi, you are my heart." From that day, she became the First Lady, not just in title, but in grace. Bobi carried herself with quiet dignity. She was not flamboyant like others in power. Her smile was calm, her speech careful. She became a symbol of feminine poise in a world ruled by men with guns. She visited hospitals, opened schools, spoke to women in villages. She would hold babies, shake hands with widows, and whisper to them, "Do not lose hope." But even in power, she remained humble. She still prayed each morning. She still wrote letters to her children with her own hand. She never forgot the small teacher she once was. Mobutu adored her presence. He would show her off at state dinners, introducing her to kings and presidents as "my beloved Bobi." When she entered a room, the atmosphere softened. Ministers lowered their voices. Guards straightened their uniforms. She was the calm in a palace of chaos. At night, when the world slept, Mobutu would take off his leopard hat and sit beside her. Sometimes he would talk about the burden of ruling. Sometimes he would simply watch her brush her hair and say, "If I die, you must live. Promise me." But promises are hard to keep when destiny has already written the ending. The years passed, the world changed. Zaire began to crumble under corruption, rebellion, and debt. The same man who had ruled with thunder began to grow old, his power slipping away like water through his fingers. Through it all, Bobi remained. She did not abandon him for safety or wealth. She stayed, as the soldiers deserted, as friends fled, as enemies rose. When the rebels marched toward Kinshasa in 1997, Mobutu fled the palace that once defined him. But by his side was Bobi, still graceful, still unbroken. The woman who once wore diamonds now carried a small bag with medicines and family photos. They went to Morocco, to Rabat, exiled and forgotten. The great leopard was now a sick man in a hospital bed. His face, once feared by millions, was pale and tired. Bobi nursed him herself. She wiped his forehead, fed him soup, read to him from the Bible. One night, as the desert wind whispered outside, he looked at her and said softly, "You are the only thing I ever did right." She held his hand, kissed it, and replied, "You did many things, Joseph, but I only wanted this, to be here with you." He smiled faintly. "Power ends," he murmured, "but love remains." A few days later, he was gone. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just sat beside his bed, tears flowing silently. The nurses watched her. The widow of a man who once ruled a nation, now just a woman holding her husband's hand. After his death, Bobi buried him in Morocco, far from the rivers of the Congo. She stood beside his grave in silence. The sun was harsh, but she didn't move. When the others left, she whispered, "You will always be my home." Years passed, governments changed, new leaders rose and fell, but Bobi lived quietly, in exile, in memory. Her children grew up. Her son Zanga entered politics, carrying his father's name with caution. She became a symbol of loyalty, the woman who loved beyond power, who stayed beyond wealth. In interviews, she rarely spoke about politics. When asked about Mobutu, she would smile gently and say, "He was not just a leader, he was a man. Strong, proud, flawed, but loving." She dreamed of returning home to Congo, to see the land where she was born, to breathe the air of the forest again. But even as she lived far away, she carried Congo in her heart and Mobutu in her soul. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit by her window and look at the stars. And in the silence, she would whisper, "Joseph, I kept my promise. I lived." Her love story is not a fairy tale. It is a story of fire and forgiveness, of exile and endurance. It is the story of a woman who loved the man behind the crown and of a man who found his humanity in her arms. Mobutu may have ruled with power, but Bobi ruled with grace. He conquered a nation. She conquered his heart. And when the history of Africa is told, amidst the noise of wars and politics, somewhere, quietly, the name Bobi Ladawa Mobutu will still shine as the woman who loved through everything.